Good evening and welcome to this installation of the Hagen History Center's Fall 2021 Speaker Series. I'm Jeff Sherry, Museum Educator. Our speaker tonight and all of the speakers this fall, Joe Pfadt, is a retired Major, Pennsylvania National Guard. His talk tonight is entitled Peacekeeping Enforcement in the Balkans. I started to say that all of our talks tonight will deal with exhibits, which we now have at the Hagen History Center. The last one deals with a book on World War I. Before I turn it over to Joe, just a few announcements from the Hagen History Center. We are currently open to the public 6 days a week from 10 to 5, featuring new exhibits in the Watson Kersey Mansion, Wood Morrison House, the Frank Lloyd Wright's original San Francisco office, and other architectural exhibits in our brand new exhibit building. Our staff has created many blogs and videos that are available on our website at www.eriehistory.org. And we encourage you to check those out regularly. Major Joe Pfadt enlisted in the United States Army, January of 1982. Major Pfadt attended Officer Candidate School at Pennsylvania Military Academy at Fort Indiantown Gap and was commissioned as second lieutenant in August of 1990. He graduated as a distinguished graduate and was awarded the Pennsylvania Commendation Medal for the Reserve Officer Association Award. Major Pfadt was mobilized after 9/11 for deployment Task Force Falcon in Kosovo in March of 2003-2004. His military awards include Meritorious Service Medal, Army Command Medal, Army Achievement Medal, Army Reserve Components Achievement Medal, third award, National Defense Service Medal, second award, Kosovo Campaign Medal, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with a silver hourglass and with the M device. Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Pfadt.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for inviting me. It's a real honor and a pleasure for me to be able to address your organization. Thanks to the Hagen History Center for supporting our veterans and certainly allowing us a platform and a format to conduct these talks with. My talk tonight will focus primarily on my time in Kosovo. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint to share with all of you, and I'll go through the organizational structure and the rotation that I went through within Kosovo. What you're seeing now is the Task Force Falcon K45 Alpha, which was the rotation that I was part of. We had members from 29 different states. You'll see many of them depicted there. We also had members from 9 different nations at different times during our deployment. As I go through the slides, I'll point out some things of interest within the Balkans, within Task Force Falcon itself, and what our mission was. As you can see, that Multinational Brigade East, we were at Camp Onsteel, Camp Monteith, for our Multinational Brigade East area of responsibility within Kosovo itself. We mobilized on March the 1st of 2003. For us, we mobilized out of the Armory on 6th and Parade. And what you see are some of the staff officers and NCOs that went with me on my mobilization. This particular image hits hard for most of us as we look back and go through the time that we were mobilized. We're leaving everything behind. And for one of our soldiers here, his young son, this was a heartfelt moment because his dad was going to be going away for quite some time. From myself, my wife Sue, 2 of my 3 kids, Alex, Tori, and John was playing in a snowbank somewhere in the parking lot. Literally from this picture, I turned around, got on the bus. We drove from Erie to Savannah, Georgia, and that began my deployment. Now at Fort Stewart, Georgia, which is just outside of Savannah, we use that as our mobilization site and our site where all of the training was going to occur to bring together soldiers from, like I said, 29 different states, different specialties, and go and conduct the business that we did in Kosovo. I'll show you just a few pictures of some of the training that all of us went through. This is the NBC chamber, which anybody who's been in the Army is familiar with this. It has many different names, but basically it is one that gives you confidence in your protective gear. We also created and constructed many mock-ups of what we would see within the theater within Kosovo itself. And as you can see, this is a religious site, and you get an example of people on patrol. For our mobilization and training, obviously it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. So you train for all of the things that you might encounter during a deployment. And here you see some night training going on, same training during the day. Again, gives you an example of what the soldiers were doing as they go through the train up. One of the easy ways that you can see that this is a training environment is you'll note that there are little black dots on different parts of the equipment, and you'll see a little red cap on the guns or on the weapons that we would fire. So as you see this, you know this is a training mode. When we get into theater, all of that goes away. We deployed with Apache attack helicopters, Bradley fighting vehicles that were already in theater, and a variety of different staff functions. This particular picture is from one of our train up exercises that would have been a significant size for the task force. Our task force was about 2,700 soldiers as we deployed. So you were seeing National Guard soldiers for the first time conduct operations in a theater of operations within Kosovo that the National Guard was in charge of. So with this, for a brigade size element, we were conducting operations. From Fort Stewart, Georgia, we then went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for our mission readiness exercise. And that was simply kind of the last stop before our mobilization. And here you see some of the command and staff officers as we were conducting some of the training that went into this. We ran what was called a tactical operations center. This was a mock-up of that we used to control our movements within Kosovo. My particular job was to work as what's called a battle captain within Multinational Brigade East. It's kind of the nerve center of the task force, and I was responsible for briefing, conducting operations within the task force itself, and I'll talk more about that later. This is kind of a timely picture. I just want to include this because about 3 o'clock every afternoon where we were at Fort Polk, it would rain incredibly hard, the roads would flood, and then within a half an hour after that, we're back up to training again. So again, some of our soldiers here is they're conducting some of our communications training, and the next several slides are going to show some anti-mine training that goes on. One of the things that I learned as I was learning about my deployment was that the Balkans had something like over 1 million landmines that were scattered around the countryside. So demining operations, or at least understanding where mines were and what to expect, was a big part of our training before we ever shipped out. And it became apparent when we got into theater that there certainly were still minefields that were being discovered. So what you'll see are some of the soldiers training up for mine detection. The machine on the bottom of the Black Hawk helicopter here is a remote controlled machine that has basically some chains on the front of it that you would remote control this and clear a path through a minefield. Certainly within our air operations, our task force had a number of air assets that we used, so the training for those was pretty significant, and it was one of the ways that we used to certainly get around in Kosovo and theater. Like any command structure, this was our task force commander, General Beck. He was a brigadier at the time. This is one of the promotion ceremonies that we had as we were training up for Kosovo during the MRE. Some of the air assets that we had, as I move more into the deployment itself, you'll see that we had multinational soldiers who were part of this, and we were doing some cross-sectional training within our air assets. After we were done with our train up, it was off to Kosovo for what's called a left seat, right seat ride, where we were taking over for the 1st Infantry Division. So for about a 2-week period of time, we would come in with them and do, like I said, a left seat, right seat ride until we took over. This next slide, this is aerial shot flying over the Balkans. Typical landscape, mountainous. You see a little village tucked away in one of the valleys here. This is the airport at Pristina. One of the things that really strikes you when you first arrive in Kosovo is the fact that there's still barbed wire, there are still craters near and around the airfield, and you certainly have a sense that you're not in the United States anymore. Before we actually took over for our mission, I'd been to Kosovo twice for reconnaissance to see what the command structure looked like, to see what the facilities looked like, and it added to our training as we got ready to ship out. Obviously a picture of Kosovo. This is from Camp Bondsteel. It's where I was stationed. As you look at one of the villages just below us, there was a school in the little village called the Rexepi School, and I'll talk more about that as well. We called this simply Big Duke Mountain. Throughout the course of the year, the elevation's high enough that for most of the year it was snow covered. Around the middle to end of May, the snow was pretty much off, but then by the time that fall came around in September, you started to see snow back on the top of the mountain as well. This is what's called transfer of authority, or TOA, and you can see the general officers that were present. Again, this was a big deal for the National Guard because it was the first time that a National Guard command or task force would be in charge of Kosovo. And again, you see our commander, General Beck, there. This is where we lived. We lived in what were called sea huts. Sea huts are something that was really developed during the Spanish-American War, during the Philippine campaign. They were quite efficient. They were just modified a little bit for Kosovo, and it's what we use. It's what you saw the full task force being supported with the sea huts. In between the two on the left, if you look closely, you'll see a concrete bunker there. That was pretty typical, along with some of the other protective devices that were around. So for the first time, you've got the NATO flag, the American flag, you've got the Pennsylvania Army National Guard flag as well flying here. This is entrance into the Tactical Operations Center, where our commander had his offices, and it's also where I worked. And you can see some of the multinationals there. Some of the aircraft, very typical for Kosovo air operations. They were ongoing, very useful within the terrain, very useful within the hops that they were conducting and the missions that were ongoing. Also, part of what we did during our period of time that we were in Kosovo was we were conducting an NCO school as well. And if you look to the right in the picture, you'll see an individual there. He's got more of what we used to refer to as a desert fatigues. This is early on in a Afghanistan deployment. So we had soldiers that were training up, going into theater into Afghanistan, and coming from theater in Afghanistan to Kosovo for different train ups that we were doing. And this one again was for a group of our NCOs. Just another shot of the air operations. I'll have any number of these just to give you a sense, and I've included a lot of these because again, it was an integral part of what we did in Kosovo. This is a picture that shows our Tactical Operations Center. If you look closely, you'll see a kind of an antenna farm on one of the buildings. Again, that's where I worked. You'll see a concrete bunker that has a keystone on it, and some of the soldiers that were going on the thoroughfare there. Some of the attack Apache helicopters, and one of the motor pools, and a bigger view of Bondsteel. You can see the Big Duke at this point. The snow was off the cover. If you look in the front kind of center of the image here, you'll see the barrier devices. These were metal grated, filled with basically gravel that were barriers all around Camp Bondsteel. And you had to go through a series of these to get onto Bondsteel or Monteith. Again, more of the ongoing training, honing the skills for our soldiers was a big part of our mission. You never knew what was going to happen one day to the next. So soldier readiness was a big part of what we did. This is a typical picture of the landscape around Kosovo. You'll have a built up area. This is outside of Camp Monteith. And then you'll have farmland where the people who live in the villages would come out and work their farms during the day and then return back to their homes in the evening, plus shops or whatever that you would see there. So strikingly, throughout the time that we were there, you would see these fields go from early planting until kind of their harvest season, and that kind of parade of people every day going back and forth out to work their fields. General Beck with one of the air operations that he was involved with. We also had a contingent of military police, and they were constantly involved in operations throughout Multinational Brigade East, largely from a unit out of Missouri. Very highly skilled individuals. It was a great pleasure to work with them. This particular unit went on to several different deployments in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And again, some of the intricacies of what they were up to. Now, as I talked about the landmines before, this is one of our VIP guests that was here. It was the Command Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, I believe, is in the middle. And you can see it's a dismounted foot patrol. You see the little path that they're walking on. Kind of the area around here, walls were very common, either block walls, as you see here, or in some of the older villages and facilities, more of a stone wall configuration. But walls were a big part of the landscape within Kosovo, along with the clay. Again, another shot here, a dismounted patrol. We had various states of equipment readiness, and from our K-pots to soft caps to the LBE and other equipment that we wore, you could quickly identify what configuration we were in as far as our force readiness structure. Some of this was designed to have a presence within Kosovo, which is certainly a big part of what we did, and some of it was designed for force protection. And things could change quite rapidly, depending on particular missions that you were on. For this particular unit, this was one of our civil affairs units on what's called a med cap, and I've got a few pictures I'll show you of this, where some of the more remote areas within Kosovo, they would simply go out, visit, conduct medical screening. And with that, and this is a constant, are the young kids that we would see everywhere. The Americans were well received by the Albanians in particular, and we would see their kids all over the place. And it was fun. We certainly did what we could to create an atmosphere where the peacekeeping force was both safe and secure, but also the interaction with the local population. By doing this, it served two functions. One, kind of get to know your neighbors, but two, you would always have kind of a sense of the pulse of where things were. If you showed up one day and you didn't see a bunch of people around, you could anticipate something was up. If you showed up and there were a bunch of kids that would come out to see you, then you had a better sense of the stability of the environment that day. Some of the areas that we would go on our patrols with, or the med caps with, would take us into some of the more outlying areas. You see the snowfall on the mountain here. You also see us setting up a vehicle checkpoint, and you'll note that this particular soldier is in a little different configuration of readiness. And one of my favorite shots here, one of our soldiers out interacting with a more remote part of Kosovo. You'll see the inquisitive kids. For the most part, our soldiers were well stocked from their families at home with little goods and trinkets to give to the kids. And in this case, the football, or whether it be a stuffed animal. I don't want to say it was about winning hearts and minds, but it certainly didn't hurt to have those kind of relationships. And again, a more informal get together with one of the locals here, husband and wife, and again, they conducted a med cap within this particular area. More of the kids. What was interesting for us was, as you see the families, it's just like families anywhere. It's mom, dad, grandparents, the kids. They all have kind of the same interests. They all have the same desire to be safe and secure in their environment. And our presence there was designed to do exactly that. This particular checkpoint was in one of the areas, and you can see it's a little higher in elevation as well. There was an individual who got hurt. We provided some first aid for him and sent him on his way. And this is from one of the larger city areas. This is from the city of Jalan. You'll see a Carabinieri vehicle in front of us. Some of the multinationals that we worked with, the Italian Carabinieri, I worked very closely with them. Had any number of missions and operations that we conducted with the Carabinieri, as they had different individuals from the theater that they had interest in. And the local Kosovo police force with an interpreter. So you see one of our soldiers here, one of our senior enlisted soldiers, out on patrol, interacting with the Kosovo police force. It was interesting for us because the police academy was in our area, had a chance to tour that and see the training that went into local law enforcement for Kosovo. And it was interesting because you had two kind of factions that were the rival factions in Kosovo. And I'll speak just briefly about what that was like. But just a couple other pictures here. This was one of my roommates. His wife organized kind of a clothing drive, and they sent boxes filled with, as you can see, hats, mittens, puzzles, games, and things like that for the kids. The guy in the tan jacket, he was the principal for the Rexepi school, and that's where this is occurring, is the Rexepi school. For myself, on Wednesdays every other week, I went to the school and I had a group of fifth graders. I'm a high school teacher at the time, and so it just made sense to do a little volunteer work for myself, and I did. So over the course of my deployment, as I had time that I could take away from my occupation, I would go out and visit the kids. It was interesting for me because you can see that I'm armed in this picture, and the kids that we took the picture with, this is towards the end of our rotation. So by this point, I had a nice opportunity to get to know some of the kids. And teaching is teaching, but it was different with an interpreter. And it was different because there were security forces that went with me as well. But an interesting thing nonetheless. And some of the kids that we were involved with, you can see the classroom that we had. Again, the things that you see in front of us, lots of people here back in the States donated equipment, goods, just school goods for the kids, and we would distribute that, give it to them, and it was kind of a fun thing for us. These are some of the smaller kids. They're having their lunch break, and again, kids are kids pretty much anywhere you go. Some of these kids had incredibly difficult stories and things that happened to them during their lives, but they went to school and they did what they needed to. Part of what we're doing here is we're helping them within the school. We built an area outside of the school that they were using as a soccer field. So we kind of leveled this off for them and made it useful for that. We also had our fair share of VIP visitors. This is former President Clinton as he visited Camp Bonsteel. And you see some of our multinationals with the president and with General Beck. The Carabinieri on the left, the Greek soldier representative in the middle, and our Polish friend next to General Beck. But again, part of what we had a number of high profile individuals. This was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Myers. He visited us a couple of times in our theater and en route to others. He's giving our command sergeant major a number of coins that would be distributed throughout the command. This is from one of the patrols that I went on. This is looking over a small village. I'm in a little village above this called Sasari. And it gives you a better understanding of what Kosovo, the terrain is like once you get off the major metropolitan areas and you really get into the vast number of kind of how people live in these remote, smaller villages. The church that I'm showing you is a church in Letnica. And Letnica is very famous. It is where Mother Teresa had gone. She lived in Skopje, which is not far from here, but she'd come to Letnica. The church at Letnica has a Black Madonna in it, and it's where Mother Teresa is believed to have had her calling for a life of service. So like any other soldier that had a chance to go to Letnica, there I am in front of the church, and we were able to tour along the church itself. Just to give you an example of how different things really are, this was certainly not an uncommon scene to see a horse-drawn cart, or to see some almost like a lawnmower turned into a road vehicle. Certainly was not unusual. Kosovo in many ways was still, I don't want to say backwards, but they were still living in almost a different century. And you got a feel for that things hadn't changed for some parts of Kosovo in a very long time. This guy's hauling either firewood or structural wood. They used wood like this to support their buildings. And I wanted to show you this particular picture because it speaks a lot to the plight of Kosovo. In Kosovo, after the ethnic cleansing occurred, you had people who left, simply up and left because things were too volatile. The ethnic cleansing, the genocide was certainly very real. So you had buildings like this house that were either unoccupied or they'd been started at some point and the family had fled, so they just sat there. The kind of construction that they used was typically with the newer buildings, you had the clay blocks, a lot of concrete, and then the kind of terracotta or tile roofs that were on top of them. So throughout the landscape, you would see maybe a third of the buildings that were unoccupied. And it was either because the families themselves had moved out, or they'd started to build and stopped, or whatever the reason happened to be. But with this, a big part of what we did was try and encourage what were called either internally displaced people or externally displaced people. Internally meant they went somewhere within Kosovo. Externally, they went somewhere outside of Kosovo and created a life for themselves there. And part of the goal was to bring people back in to repopulate Kosovo. So as you see pictures like that, you can see the various levels of where people are living and kind of the conditions of how they live. By our standards, not so great. By their standards, this is what they were used to. Again, this goes back to outside of the village of Sassari, and you can see the goat herder, and you can see the condition of the farms out here. One thing was certain: the farther you got from a populated area, the more, I don't want to say primitive, but the more, for lack of better words, just run down nature of things. Partially collapsed buildings, laundry hanging out on a fence, and as you can see trash and things like that in the foreground. Very typical. Coming back to one of our guys, this is one of our EOD guys. They're conducting their operations. Because of the landmines, because of things that they were finding, we conducted a significant amount of landmine discovery. And add on top of that, every time that we would go out on patrol, as I mentioned before, you're going to see kids, and they're going to come up to our soldiers, just looking to do meet and greets, whatever the case may be. But typically, our guys are going to have something in their vehicles. Another walking patrol. These are some of our MP folks that are out in one of the smaller villages. Within our area of operations, we divided up by nationalities, and they're in one of the Greek areas on their patrol here. Again, more of the kids. And as I said before, you saw all method and manner of vehicles. This is basically a pony that's pulling this cart, and on the cart he has what was going to be recycled material here. Some of our guys doing a med cap, and again, these med caps were simply go out to the more remote areas within Kosovo, conduct screening operations within the medical field, blood pressure, so on and so forth. And this could be the only medical visit that these individuals could have for long periods of time. And again, also helped us keep our fingers on the pulse of what was going on within country. The police working dogs, a big part of what we use, smuggling operations from basically east to west through the thoroughfares of Kosovo. It wasn't uncommon for us to find different contraband as it was moving through the area. Obviously, our soldiers would be greatly engendered or endeared to their working dogs. And again, more of the city life as one of our foot patrols is out. This is General Skumaker. He was the Chief of Staff of the Army. He's just off to the left of center, has a larger entourage, but came out and did a foot patrol with one of our squads here. In the background, you can see some of the unfinished buildings, a little bit of destruction here from the ethnic cleansing area, and one of our soldiers out on patrol. This is our medical facility at Camp Bonsteel. We easily had the best medical facility, I would say, in Kosovo, with it probably not within most of the region of the Balkans. Really top-notch medical care if we needed it. Again, more just the local population, their kind of view of the world, more of our aviation assets. Everything in Kosovo was for air assets was close together. It was easy to get around Kosovo with air operations. This is a controlled explosion from our EOD guys after we would collect a number of explosives, landmines, whatever it happened to be. We would conduct these operations and get rid of them. And here's another one a little bit later on. Like anywhere else, soldiers would enlist, re-enlist, get promoted. This is on Big Duke. As you can see, a commander's re-enlisting one of his soldiers here. This is outside of Camp Bondsteel. This gives you a little bit of an indication of kind of the quality of life overall within Kosovo. You see a number of places still, no windows, tiles missing from roofs, that kind of thing. And again, this is outside of Letnica. And more of the local transportation. It was interesting to me, the donkeys would be loaded up. They would kind of be sent on their way by themselves. They would follow the trails through the mountains and end up where they were supposed to go. Obviously, the smugglers would use this as a smuggling technique as well. But when you actually see it happening, it's like traveling back in time. This is one of the patrols that I was on. We were out in the area around Sassari again. All right, and you can see part of the town of Jalan. Note all the dishes. They had about 3 television stations that they could get on their dishes. This is some battle damage from what had been a Serbian structure. This was a potential grave site. One of the things that we were continually looking for were any signs of the ethnic cleansing and the genocide that had occurred within Kosovo. So we had response teams that would go out and respond to those. And as I wrap up the patrolling and I wrap up the kind of the once over the world here of Kosovo, just to show you a few shots from around the landscape, give you a little familiarity with what's going on. Some of the multinationals, these are the Romanians who are involved with some cross training with some of our soldiers in air operations. Again, more battle ready kind of training here, honing skills on a range. And as I said before, we cross-trained with people who were in Afghanistan, and that's one of the soldiers from Afghanistan there. Some winter operations with the Apaches and a winter patrol. Just because it got cold didn't mean that we shut down. Soldiers were out manning their posts. And you can see a little bit of the back of Camp Bondsteel here, looking out into the local village. And the last few shots here just from some of our soldiers on Big Duke 6. Again, the flag with both the American flag, the NATO flag, and the Pennsylvania flag. And that was my Task Force Falcon. We spent an awful lot of time in theater with the locals, with individuals who were trying to rebuild Kosovo and conduct operations within Kosovo to bring it into, I don't say the 20th, 21st century, but that's what we're trying to do. There was a lot of destruction, a lot of remnants of the ethnic cleansing. The ethnic cleansing was very real. It's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to be on the ground and see where a mass grave or a mass execution had occurred and to know what had gone into that. One of the things that I just found out this week was within Afghanistan, they're taking some of the Afghan refugees from Afghanistan and they're putting them into Kosovo. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, there's certainly housing that's available within the landscape around there, but Kosovo in some ways probably is not that dissimilar from what they would see in Afghanistan. And it makes sense. It's not a big leap into an ultra-modern civilization or community. It gives them kind of a stepping stone into something that they would be more familiar with. So that's a little bit about my deployment and a little bit about what I saw. A lot of pictures of the kids, because that's a lot of what you would see. A lot of pictures of the buildings and kind of the rundown nature of things, because it was still the remnants of the ethnic cleansing in 2003 and in 2004. So showing you a number of those kind of things. With that, Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Joe. That was fantastic. I mean, I hope that most Americans haven't forgotten what all of you did in Kosovo and how terrible the Balkans were before the peacekeeping forces got there. I'd like to thank you for that. You and I had mentioned, and you mentioned something about transitioning people to Afghanistan. Do you have any thoughts or comments on the situation that has recently occurred in Afghanistan, or?
Well, I think that what I would do is I would say I was mobilized in 2003. I knew at the end of 2002 that things were going to occur, that I was going to get mobilized. For me, I thought, like many guardsmen, I would probably have one tour, a period at home, and then another tour. What happened with me was after my tour, I worked basically for the commanding general and the G3 in the operations cell. And I was then promoted. I came back and I worked for the garrison commander at Indiantown Gap, where we trained soldiers up. And some of the things that we had developed during our rotation were applied for soldiers that were going to both Afghanistan and Iraq. So I thought for sure I was going to end up getting mobilized and deployed again. As it turned out, I just didn't. And it's very, I guess, personal to me, because a lot of the soldiers that were part of our command or soldiers that I knew from across the country that were deployed went through the hardships of a couple of deployments and really put a lot out there. I just want to say I'm disappointed with how it ended for them because of the effort, the things that I know that we were doing in Kosovo. They were doing the same kind of operations to try and get a feel for, in Afghanistan, ways that the civilization there could move forward. Because it's difficult to tell somebody that Afghanistan was living in a different century, but when you're actually there on the ground and you experience that, it is a whole different, very complex set of circumstances that it makes it more and more difficult to walk away from, because you develop very personal relationships with people in the countryside.
I'm sure. It had to be hard to watch that happen, especially so quickly. For you who knew a lot of guys who were there and women who were there. One viewer has said to thank you for your service, both in the National Guard through your career and in Kosovo. And at this point, we don't have any questions. So Joe, I'm going to say thank you very much. I think I look forward to having you as a speaker again. And I want to tell everyone that viewed that our next talk is on